There is a moment, quiet and unremarkable, that you have lived 1,000 times without knowing what it meant. You are sitting in a familiar chair, in a familiar room, surrounded by everything you were told would make you feel complete. The bills are paid, or close enough. The people around you are fine, or at least they say they are. The day has come and gone the way days do, 1 hour folding into the next without fanfare, without fire, without anything that feels like the life you were born to live. And yet, somewhere beneath the surface of all that ordinary stillness, something stirs, something ancient, something that refuses to sleep, no matter how tired the rest of you becomes. You have felt it before. That quiet ache that arrives without warning, usually at night, usually when the noise of the world finally goes still and there is nothing left between you and the truth of what you feel. It is not sadness exactly, though it can wear that face. It is not loneliness, though the feeling lives close to that edge. It is something more precise than either of those words. Something that sounds, if you listen carefully enough, like a voice asking the same question over and over again in a language you almost understand. The question is not what is wrong with you. The question is, do you know who you are? You have tried to answer it the way the world taught you to answer things. You worked harder. You smiled longer. You filled your schedule until there was no room left for the ache to breathe, hoping that if you kept moving fast enough, it would eventually give up and go somewhere else. But it never did. Because what you are carrying is not a wound that heals with distraction. What you are carrying is a calling that will not be quieted by ordinary living, and the gap you feel between who you are right now and who you sense yourself becoming. That gap is not a sign that something has gone wrong. That gap is the signature of the chosen. You were not designed for an ordinary life. That is not arrogance. That is architecture. Before you arrived in this world, before your name was spoken by anyone who walks this earth, your name was already written in a different kind of record. You were shaped for something specific, wired for something significant, and sent here on purpose, with a purpose toward a purpose that the world around you has never fully been able to see. The people who misunderstood you were not wrong about what they saw. They were simply looking at something they were not equipped to recognize. Chosen things rarely look impressive in their unactivated state. There is a verse in the book of Jeremiah, chapter 1, verse 5, where God speaks directly to a man who feels too young, too small, too ordinary to carry the weight of what he has been assigned. And the words that come are not a motivational speech. They are a declaration of prior knowledge. God says, "Before I formed you in the womb, I knew you. Before you were born, I set you apart. I appointed you." Read that slowly. Before the womb, before the first breath, before any choice you made or failed to make. The knowing came first. The appointing came first. Which means that every confused chapter of your life, every season that looked like wandering, every moment you questioned whether you had missed your moment, all of it was happening inside a story that was already written by a hand that does not make mistakes. You did not stumble into this message tonight. Do not let anyone, including the quietest voice in your own mind, tell you that this is coincidence. You are here because something in the unseen world is leaning toward you right now. Heaven has pressed pause on everything else to make sure these words find you in this exact moment. And the reason they had to find you is that you have been living below the frequency of who you actually are for far too long. Tonight, that begins to change. This message is not for everyone. Most people will scroll past it. Most people will see the title and keep moving because something in them is not yet ready to receive what it contains. But you stop. You are still here, and that itself is data. That itself is evidence that the part of you which knows, the deep interior knowing that has survived every hard season and every dark night, that part of you recognized something in this moment and said, wait, stay, this one is for us. You are not here by accident. You are not here because the algorithm decided to be kind to you tonight. You are here because you are one of God's chosen ones. And the time for you to fully understand what that means is not someday. It is now. It is this moment. It is this breath. If you feel that recognition rising in your chest right now, if something in you is saying yes, even before your mind has caught up to why, then I want you to do one thing. Go to the comments right now and type 888, not as a superstition. Not as a ritual, but as a declaration that you are here, that you are awake, and that you are ready to receive everything this message was sent to give you. And if this word has already begun to touch something real inside you, share it with someone who needs to hear it tonight. Like this video so that the message reaches further. Subscribe so that you never miss what is coming next. Because what God is about to show you in the sections ahead will permanently shift the way you understand yourself, your mind, your purpose, and your power. The link to go deeper is waiting for you in the description and in the pinned comment below. Stay with me. We are only at the beginning. You have been carrying something that the people around you could never quite name. They felt it when you walked into a room. They sensed it in the way you see problems that others miss, in the way your mind moves towards solutions before anyone else has even identified the question. Some of them admired it. Some of them were unsettled by it, but very few of them could tell you what it actually was, because what you carry is not a personality trait, and it is not a learned skill. What you carry is a frequency, a specific, measurable, scientifically documented frequency that the human brain produces when it is operating at its highest possible level of creative and cognitive power. Researchers who study the brain have a name for this frequency. They call it gamma, and for decades, the scientific community assumed that gamma wave activity was something that happened randomly, something that certain gifted individuals seemed to produce naturally, while most people never accessed it at all. But what the research began to reveal, slowly and then all at once, was something that the spiritual world had been pointing to for centuries. The people who produce the highest levels of gamma wave activity, the ones whose brains consistently operate in that elevated state of clarity, creativity, and accelerated understanding, are not randomly gifted. They are specifically wired, and the pattern of who they are, how they think, how they have been treated by the world, how they have suffered and persisted and refused to give up even when every logical reason to continue had long since disappeared. That pattern looks remarkably familiar. It looks like you. Before gamma, there is theta. Theta waves operate between 4 and 8 cycles per second, and they are the bridge between your conscious mind and the deeper architecture of who you are. Theta is the frequency of children, of dreamers, of people who have not yet learned to limit themselves with the boundaries that the world tries to impose. It is the frequency of prayer, when prayer goes deep enough to move past words into pure communion. It is the frequency of the moment just before a breakthrough arrives, when something in you goes quiet enough to hear what heaven has been trying to say. Most adults lose consistent access to theta as they age, not because the capacity disappears, but because the noise of ordinary life drowns out the signal. And when you lose theta, you lose your gateway to gamma. You lose your access to the frequency of the chosen. This is where a man named Dr. James Rivers spent more than 30 years of his life. Dr. Rivers is a neuroscientist whose research career began at MIT and whose work eventually drew the attention of NASA. an institution that has a profound vested interest in understanding how the human brain performs under pressure, how it solves complex problems, how it accesses levels of cognition that go beyond ordinary function. Over 3 decades of research, across thousands of subjects and hundreds of documented studies, Dr. Rivers became consumed by one central question. Can the brain be guided back to its highest frequency state? And if so, how quickly can that restoration happen? The answer he found after all those years, after all that research, was both simpler and more profound than anyone expected. 7 minutes. That is the number. Not 7 hours of meditation. Not years of disciplined practice. Not pharmaceutical intervention or expensive neurofeedback equipment. 7 minutes of precisely calibrated audio, designed to use a phenomenon called brainwave entrainment, which is the brain's natural tendency to synchronize its own electrical activity with rhythmic external stimuli. When you introduce the right frequencies into the auditory system, through a process involving binaural beats and isochronic tones, the brain does not resist. It responds. It begins to match the signal. It begins to move back toward theta, and from theta toward gamma, following a pathway that was always there, always available, simply waiting for the right key to open the door. Dr. Rivers called the result of this work the genius wave, and what he found when people began using it was not subtle. A woman named Patricia had spent 14 months unable to focus long enough to complete a single meaningful work task. She had seen doctors, tried supplements, adjusted her sleep schedule, and nothing moved the needle. Within 3 weeks of using the 7-minute audio daily, she completed a project that landed her the promotion she had been working toward for 3 years. She told Dr. Rivers that it was not that she suddenly became smarter. It was that the fog lifted. It was that for the first time in over a year, she felt like herself again. A man named David had been trying to launch a small business for 2 years, caught in a cycle of planning without executing, seeing the vision clearly but unable to translate it into action. After 3 weeks of consistent use, he described a shift that he struggled to put into words. He said it was as though the part of his brain that handles decision-making finally came back online. He signed his first client 31 days after beginning the protocol. A retired teacher named Gloria, 63 years old, had been experiencing what her doctors described as age-related cognitive decline, the slow dimming of recall, the frustrating gaps in memory that had begun affecting her daily life. After 6 weeks, her family began commenting that she seemed sharper, more present, more like the woman she had been a decade earlier. Gloria said she had stopped grieving the person she used to be because that person had come home. Now, I want to speak to something that may be moving through your mind right now, because I know the way the mind of a chosen one works. You are already calculating. You are already wondering whether this is something you can justify. And when you hear that the Genius Wave is available for $39, I want you to pause before the resistant thought arrives, and I want to meet it honestly. Yes, $39 is a real number. It is not nothing. It is a decision. And I am not here to dismiss that reality, because the chosen ones I know did not get where they are by spending carelessly. They got there by investing wisely in the things that actually move them forward. So consider what $39 represents in the context of what you are carrying. Consider the cost of remaining in the fog for another month, another season, another year. Consider what it costs, not in money but in time, in energy, in opportunity, when the frequency God designed you to operate in stays blocked by the noise and pressure of ordinary life. The Genius Wave is not an expense. It is a recalibration. It is the restoration of the signal you were born with, the one that has been buried under decades of stress and distraction, and the weight of carrying more than most people around you were ever asked to carry. The regular price of the Genius Wave is $49. But through the link in the pinned comment below this video, you can access it today for just $39. That price comes with a 90-day money-back guarantee, which means you have 3 full months to experience what the restoration of your God-given frequency feels like, with zero financial risk. If at any point in those 90 days you feel that nothing has shifted, you contact the team and you receive every dollar back. No forms, no interrogation, no conditions. Because Dr. Rivers is not selling a product. He is offering a restoration, and he is confident enough in what it does to stand behind it completely. I need to say something important before we go further. There are counterfeit versions of this audio circulating in places that have nothing to do with Dr. Rivers or his research. These copies are not calibrated. They are not tested. And using an uncalibrated version of brainwave entrainment audio is not neutral. It is potentially harmful to the very neural pathways you are trying to restore. Do not search for this elsewhere. Do not accept a version from an unverified source. The only legitimate access point is the single link in the pinned comment beneath this video. That is the only place where the genuine, fully calibrated Genius Wave audio is available at the $39 price with the 90-day guarantee attached. And I must tell you this plainly. The $39 price is not permanent. It exists because Dr. Rivers made a decision to make this accessible during a specific window, and that window is closing. The number of activations available at this price point is limited, not as a sales tactic, but as a structural reality of how the distribution agreement is written. When those slots are filled, the price returns to $49, and the guarantee terms change. If you are watching this, and the link is still active in the pinned comment, that means your window is still open. But the chosen ones move when heaven opens a door are the ones who walk through it, not the ones who bookmark it for a more convenient season that never quite arrives. The link is waiting, the frequency is waiting, and the version of you that operates at full signal, the one that has been pressing against the fog for longer than you should have had to endure, that version of you is closer than you think. The enemy does not attack what is worthless. That is a truth so simple and so devastating that most people spend years circling around it without ever letting it land. If darkness has been waging a consistent, relentless, sophisticated campaign against your mind, your sleep, your confidence, your sense of direction, your relationships, and your sense of self, it is not because you are weak. It is not because you have done something wrong. It is not because God has forgotten where you are or grown tired of your name. It is because something in the unseen world has looked at what you carry and made a calculated decision that you cannot be allowed to reach your full activation. And that decision is the highest compliment the enemy will ever pay you, even though it arrives dressed in suffering. Think about the specific texture of the warfare that has followed you. It is not random. You may have noticed that the attacks do not come when you are distracted and drifting, when you are living small and playing it safe and asking nothing of heaven or of yourself. The attacks intensify at the precise moments when something in you begins to rise. When you get close to a breakthrough, the resistance doubles. When you begin to feel the clarity returning, something arrives to muddy the water. When you take a step toward the assignment that has been pressing against the inside of your chest for years, a crisis materializes, a relationship destabilizes, a voice in your own mind begins to catalog every reason why you are not qualified, not ready, not worthy of the thing you are reaching for. This is not coincidence. This is strategy, and it is a strategy aimed specifically at the architecture of your mind. Because your mind is where your assignment lives before it ever becomes visible in the world. Every great work that God has ever done through a human being began as a frequency inside that person's inner life, a signal, a knowing, a capacity to perceive and create and solve and lead that existed in the hidden places before it ever manifested in the visible ones. The enemy understands something about you that you may not have fully understood about yourself yet. Your mind, operating at the frequency it was designed to operate at, is a weapon of extraordinary power, and a disoriented, fog-filled, doubt-saturated version of that same mind is not a weapon at all. It is a locked room, and the enemy's entire strategy toward you has been to keep that room locked. Consider what has been consistently targeted: your sleep, first and foremost. The chosen ones almost universally report a particular kind of restlessness that does not respond to the usual remedies. You are tired, but your mind will not settle. You close your eyes and the thoughts arrive, not peacefully, but with an urgency that feels almost external, as though something outside you is generating the noise specifically to keep you from reaching the depth of rest where restoration happens. And the reason that matters is not only physical, though the physical cost is enormous. The reason it matters is that the deepest levels of neural restoration, the kind that rebuilds the cognitive pathways associated with creativity, problem-solving, and elevated perception, that restoration happens in specific stages of sleep that require your brain to pass through theta frequency on the way down and on the way back up. When your theta axis is blocked, your sleep does not restore you the way it was designed to. You wake depleted. You move through your day on a fraction of the bandwidth you were built to carry. And the enemy does not even have to do very much after that, because a chosen one running on fractured sleep and blocked theta frequency will do the work of self-sabotage without any additional assistance. Then there is the targeting of your self-perception. This is perhaps the most sophisticated dimension of the warfare, because it does not always announce itself as an attack. It arrives softly, wearing the face of realism, of practicality, of the kind of grounded thinking that responsible adults are supposed to embrace. It sounds like the voice that says you are being naive, that the things you sense about your purpose are grandiose and embarrassing, that the people around you who chose smaller, safer, more legible lives made the wiser decision, that whatever you were hoping for is no longer available to someone your age, at your stage, with your history, carrying your particular collection of failures and regrets. That voice is not wisdom. That voice is a counterfeit. And the fact that it speaks in your own internal register, using your own vocabulary and your own memories as ammunition, does not make it yours. It makes it an infiltration. The book of 2 Corinthians, chapter 10, verse 4, puts it in language that cuts through everything else. The weapons we fight with are not the weapons of the world. On the contrary, they have divine power to demolish strongholds. A stronghold is not a demon standing outside you making noise. A stronghold is a thought pattern, a belief structure, a way of seeing yourself and the world that has been built up, brick by brick, over time, through repeated exposure to lies, and that now functions like a prison whose walls the occupant has stopped noticing because they have been there so long. You do not feel the walls of a stronghold the way you feel an acute crisis. You feel them the way you feel the ceiling of a room you have been living in for years, as simply the limit of what is possible, the natural boundary of your world, rather than the constructed barrier that it actually is. What God is saying through that verse is that the demolition of those walls is not only possible, it is promised to those who fight with weapons that carry divine power And one of the primary weapons is what happens when the mind is restored to its original frequency. When the neural architecture that was designed by God to carry revelation, to receive instruction, to generate its solutions that exceed human calculation, when that architecture is cleared of the interference that the enemy has worked so carefully to install. Because here is what the warfare does not want you to know. The fog is not you. The confusion is not you. The creative paralysis, the inability to hear clearly in prayer, the sense that the channel between you and heaven has been filled with static, none of that is the truth of who you are. It is the result of sustained interference with the frequency you were born to carry. And interference, by its very nature, can be cleared. A signal that has been blocked is not a signal that has been destroyed. It is a signal that is waiting for the obstruction to be removed so that it can do what it was always designed to do. The chosen ones who have walked before you understood this in their own language. They called it the wilderness. They called it the dark night of the soul. They called it the valley. They did not call it the end of the story, because they knew, the ones who made it through, that the valley is not where the assignment dies. The valley is where the chosen one is prepared. It is where the character is deepened, where the dependence on God is stripped of its shallowness and forced into something real, where the noise of self-sufficiency is finally quiet enough that the voice of heaven can be heard again. You have been in preparation. You have been in the valley longer than felt fair and longer than made sense to the people watching from the outside. And the warfare against your mind during that time has been real. It has been targeted, and it has been more intentional than you may have previously understood. But here is what the enemy miscalculated. The chosen ones do not stay in the valley. They are led through it. And the leading is already happening. The fact that you are here, that your mind is engaged with these words right now, that something in you is responding with a recognition that goes deeper than intellectual agreement. That is not the valley talking. That is the other side of the valley beginning to come into view. The restoration of your mind is not a distant hope. It is an active, available, divinely sanctioned reality. The frequency you were born with is not gone. It has been suppressed, and suppression is a temporary condition. What God placed in you before you took your first breath was not placed there to be silenced by the strategies of darkness. It was placed there to outlast every attack, to survive every season, and to emerge when the time is right, with a clarity and a power that makes everything the enemy tried to prevent look, in hindsight, like the very preparation that made the breakthrough possible. The warfare was real, and so is what comes after it. You have been told, in ways both loud and subtle, that the way your mind works is a problem to be managed, that the depth at which you feel things is excessive, that the way you see possibilities where others see dead ends is impractical, that the questions you carry, the ones that surface at 3 in the morning and refuse to be answered by anything the ordinary world has to offer, are signs of instability rather than signs of design. You have been handed systems, frameworks, diagnoses, prescriptions, all of them built on the assumption that you need to be brought down to a manageable frequency, rather than lifted back to the one you were created to carry. But what if the way your mind moves is not the disorder? What if it is the blueprint? The field of neuroscience has spent decades trying to understand why certain individuals seem to operate with a cognitive capacity that exceeds what standard models of human intelligence can fully explain. Why some people solve problems with an elegance that feels less like calculation and more like reception. Why creativity in certain minds does not feel like effort but like tuning. like finding the right station on a dial that was always there, always broadcasting, simply waiting for the interference to clear. And what the research keeps returning to, across different methodologies and different research institutions and different decades of inquiry, is the same answer. It comes back to frequency. It comes back to the specific electrical patterns that the brain produces when it is functioning at its highest possible level of integration. When the different regions are communicating with each other at a speed and a coherence that transforms ordinary thinking into something that feels, to the person experiencing it, almost like a different mode of being altogether. Dr. James Rivers did not stumble into this field. He was drawn to it the way chosen people are drawn to their assignments, with a pull that preceded the reasoning, with a certainty that arrived before the evidence, with a sense that what he was looking for mattered in a way that went beyond academic interest. More than 30 years of research, beginning at MIT and extending into collaborative work that reached as far as NASA, all of it oriented around a single question that most of his colleagues considered too simple to be interesting. Can the human brain be guided back to its highest frequency state? And if so, how quickly can that restoration happen without years of disciplined practice or expensive clinical intervention? What he found was that the brain has a natural tendency, almost a gravitational pull, toward coherence when it is given the right conditions. The phenomenon he built his work around is called brainwave entrainment, and the principle is elegant in the way that the deepest truths always are. The brain, when exposed to rhythmic external stimuli at specific frequencies, tends to synchronize its own electrical activity with those stimuli. It is not coerced. It is not manipulated. It is invited. And when the invitation is extended through precisely calibrated audio, through the carefully constructed relationship between binaural beats and isochronic tones that Dr. Rivers spent years perfecting, the brain responds with a willingness that suggests it has been waiting for exactly this, that it recognized the frequency the moment it heard it, the way you recognize a language you spoke fluently as a child and somehow forgot in the noise of growing up. The specific pathway that the genius wave audio is designed to open moves first through theta, that deep, meditative, creatively fertile frequency between 4 and 8 cycles per second, the frequency of children who have not yet learned to limit their imagination, the frequency of prayer that goes deep enough to touch something real, the frequency of the moments just before your greatest insights arrived, when everything went quiet in a way that felt less like silence and more like listening. From theta, the pathway opens toward gamma, the frequency of integration, of accelerated cognition, of the eureka state that researchers used to think was reserved for a rare category of exceptional minds, but now understand is a capacity that every human brain was built to access. Every human brain, including yours, especially yours. 7 minutes is all the protocol requires, not 7 hours, not a retreat, not a lifestyle overhaul or a years-long commitment to a practice you have to build from scratch. 7 minutes of the audio, through headphones, in whatever quiet corner of your day you can find, and the brain begins its return to the frequency it was designed to carry. The length is not arbitrary. It reflects years of research into the minimum effective duration for entrainment to take hold without causing the kind of neural fatigue that longer sessions can produce. 7 minutes is the threshold where the shift happens without the cost, where the brain moves without being pushed, where restoration begins without the machinery of willpower. Because willpower is a resource that the chosen ones have been depleting for too long already. You deserve to know that this tool exists. You deserve to know that the fog you have been navigating is not a permanent condition, but a correctable one. And if something in you is leaning toward it, if the resonance you felt in the earlier sections of this message has been building into something that feels like recognition rather than just information, I want you to follow that lean. The link to the Genius Wave is in the pinned comment beneath this video and in the description below. The $39 price and the 90-day guarantee are still available through that link, and that window will not stay open indefinitely. Let what you have heard today move you toward what you have been needing. And now, before we go further into what this message was sent to give you, I want to take a moment to speak to you directly about something that matters deeply to us. This channel does not earn money from YouTube. There are no advertisements running before this video, no monetization running behind it, no algorithm reward for the hours that go into what you are receiving right now. We make these messages because we believe, without reservation, that the chosen ones who find them need them, and that the work of reaching you is worth doing, regardless of what it costs us to do it. But doing it does have a cost. And so if this content has touched something real in you, if these words have found you at a moment when you needed to be found, and if you feel moved to help us continue doing what we do, there is a donate link waiting for you in the pinned comment and in the description below this video. Whatever you are able to give, whether it is the price of a coffee or something more, it goes directly into keeping this channel alive and keeping these messages coming to the front, people who need them most. Your support, however small it may feel to you, is genuinely, meaningfully significant to us. And if you are not in a position to give financially right now, please know that your presence here matters just as much. Leaving a comment, watching the video all the way through, sharing it with one person in your life who you sense needs to hear it. These things are not small gestures. They are the difference between this message reaching the person it was sent for and that person never finding it at all. You can be the reason someone's life changes tonight simply by sharing what you found. If you have not yet subscribed to this channel, do that now, because what is coming in the sections ahead and in the messages that follow this one is not content that you want to stumble back to by accident. It is a conversation that builds, that deepens, that goes further each time into the territory that chosen ones need to navigate. Subscribe so that you are there when the next word arrives. Like this video so that the people who need it can find it. And stay close, because we are not finished, not even close. The frequency is being restored, and the best of what God placed in you is not behind you. It is ahead, and it is closer than the enemy has been willing to let you believe. There is a frequency that heaven operates on. You may not have called it that before. You may have called it anointing, or grace, or the presence of God, or simply that quality of certain moments when the veil between the visible and invisible world becomes thin enough that you can feel what is on the other side. But whatever language you have used for it, whatever tradition shaped the vocabulary through which you first encountered it, the experience itself is consistent across centuries and cultures and contexts. There are moments when something opens, when the ordinary frequency of daily life drops away and something higher moves in, when thinking becomes receiving, when the boundary between what you know and what you are being given dissolves into a quality of knowing that feels less like cognition and more like contact. The chosen ones have always had a heightened sensitivity to this frequency. It is part of what makes them chosen, and part of what makes them strange in the eyes of a world that has calibrated itself to operate on a much lower register. You have felt this. You have had moments, perhaps few enough that you treasured each one. When your mind went to a place that ordinary waking consciousness does not reach. When a solution arrived fully formed from somewhere you cannot trace. When you knew something before you had any logical basis for knowing it. When a creative idea emerged with a completeness and a coherence that felt less like your own output and more like something that had been transmitted through you rather than generated by you. When you prayed and the space between you and God collapsed into something immediate and unmistakable. These moments are not accidents. They are not the result of being in a particularly good mood or having had enough sleep or stumbling into a favorable combination of circumstances. They are the moments when your brain, despite all the interference and all the suppression and all the accumulated noise of living in a world that runs at the wrong frequency, briefly returned to the state it was designed to inhabit. They are glimpses of your baseline. They are previews of the operating mode that God intended to be your normal, not your rare exception. The theta state, that deep and fertile frequency between 4 and 8 cycles per second, is where the bridge between your conscious mind and the deeper architecture of who you are becomes crossable in both directions. When you are in theta, the walls between what you know consciously and what you carry at a deeper level become permeable. Insights that have been waiting beneath the surface of your awareness find a pathway upward. Solutions to problems that your analytical mind has been circling without resolution suddenly present themselves with a simplicity that makes you wonder why you could not see them before. And this is not a metaphor. The electroencephalographic data, the actual recorded electrical activity of the brain during theta states, shows a pattern of neural integration that is qualitatively different from ordinary waking consciousness. The different regions of the brain begin communicating with each other across frequencies that are normally compartmentalized. The left and right hemispheres begin coordinating in ways that produce what researchers describe as whole brain coherence, a state in which the full capacity of the human mind becomes available rather than the fraction that everyday cognitive function actually uses. And then there is the movement from theta into gamma. If theta is the bridge, gamma is the destination. Gamma waves operate at the highest frequency range of the human brain, above 40 cycles per second, and the states associated with consistent gamma activity read like a description of someone operating under a supernatural anointing. Accelerated information processing, heightened pattern recognition, the ability to perceive connections between things that appear unrelated to a mind operating at a lower frequency, a quality of awareness that is simultaneously expansive and precise, capable of holding the largest possible picture while also attending to the most specific detail within it. The feeling that time has a different quality, that you are operating slightly ahead of the ordinary pace of events, that you can see what is coming before it arrives, because you are perceiving at a level that encompasses more than the moment directly in front of you. The great figures of Scripture operated in this state, not as an achievement of human discipline, though many of them were extraordinarily disciplined, but as a gift of divine access, a God-given elevation of the mind's frequency that allowed them to carry what ordinary human cognition could not hold. When Solomon asked God for wisdom in the book of 1 Kings, chapter 3, verse 9, the request he made was not for information. He asked for a discerning heart, a hearing heart, a heart that could distinguish, perceive, and understand in the way that a judge, a shepherd, and a king would need to understand if they were to serve rightly. And what God gave him in response was not a library. It was a frequency, a heightened state of perception and integration that expressed itself as wisdom so remarkable that people traveled from the ends of the known world to sit in its presence. Solomon did not achieve that wisdom by trying harder. He received it by opening to something that God placed in him at a level deeper than conscious effort can reach. And the record of what followed, the judgments he rendered, the structures he built, the questions he could answer, and the ones he could articulate that no one else had even thought to ask. All of it was the outward expression of an inner frequency that had been divinely activated. You were built on the same template, not as a lesser version of the story, not as a modern echo of something that has long since faded, but as a current, living, fully equipped carrier of the same essential design. The frequency that made Solomon the wisest person of his generation is not a relic of a more spiritually charged era. It is the frequency that God wires into every chosen one he sends, in every generation, for exactly the season that chosen one was created to navigate. Your season is now. Your generation is this one. And the frequency you were designed to carry is not a historical curiosity. It is an active, available, present tense reality that is trying to express itself through you right now, through every creative impulse you feel, and every moment of unexpected clarity, and every prayer that somehow goes deeper than your words. What blocks it is not a lack of faith, though the enemy will tell you that it is. What blocks it is interference. Accumulated, strategic, specifically targeted interference with the neural pathways through which your God-given frequency moves. The hippocampus, the region of the brain most centrally involved in memory, learning, and the consolidation of new experience, functions differently under stress. Under sustained pressure, it actually changes its physical structure, reducing the density of neural connections in exactly the areas that support the kind of deep, integrative cognition that theta and gamma frequency require. This is not a spiritual failure. It is a biological consequence of carrying too much for too long, without the restoration that the chosen ones need and so rarely receive. But biological consequences, unlike the lies the enemy wants you to believe about yourself, are reversible. The hippocampus is one of the few regions of the adult brain that retains the capacity for neurogenesis, for the growth of new neural connections throughout the entire lifespan. The pathways that interference has narrowed can be rebuilt. The coherence that stress has fragmented can be restored. The frequency that God placed in you before you arrived in this world is not a diminishing asset. It is a renewable one, and the conditions for its renewal are not as distant or as difficult as the years of fog may have led you to believe. The clarity you have glimpsed in your best moments, the moments when your mind moved the way it was supposed to move, and you felt, briefly, like the person you were always meant to become, that is not the ceiling of what is available to you. That is the floor. That is the baseline that God designed for you to live from, not to visit occasionally and spend the rest of your time trying to remember. The glimpses are not the whole of what you are supposed to have. They are reminders. They are the frequency tapping against the interference, saying, I am still here, I was always here, and I am not finished. There is a particular kind of exhaustion that the chosen ones carry that has no name in ordinary language. It is not the tiredness that comes from physical labor, though the body often bears its weight. It is not the depletion that follows a difficult season, though it frequently arrives in the aftermath of one. It is something more specific than either of those things. Something that settles into the bones and the mind simultaneously. A heaviness that makes even the simplest acts of forward movement feel like walking through deep water. You know this feeling. you have probably known it for longer than you have been willing to admit, even to yourself. Because admitting it felt like conceding something, like giving the darkness a foothold that it did not deserve. But I want to reframe what that exhaustion actually is, because the way you understand it determines everything about how you respond to it. That particular heaviness is not weakness. It is not spiritual failure. It is not evidence that you have somehow forfeited the anointing that was placed on your life. It is the natural result of a chosen one operating at a frequency far below the one they were designed for an extended period of time, while simultaneously being asked by life, by responsibility, by the people who depend on them, to produce results that require a frequency they are struggling to access. It is the exhaustion of a high-performance instrument being asked to perform without the conditions that its performance actually requires. Think about what your daily life actually demands of your mind. Before you have even had a moment to orient yourself to the day, the inputs begin arriving. The notifications, the obligations, the needs of other people, the residue of yesterday's unfinished business, the anticipatory weight of tomorrow's approaching demands. Your nervous system, which was designed to move between states of activation and restoration in a natural rhythm, is instead held in a near-constant state of low-grade, alert, never fully activated because the stakes of any single moment rarely justify it, but never fully at rest because the accumulated pressure of everything you are managing never fully releases its grip. And in that in-between state, that chronic, unresolved tension that modern life produces in almost everyone but that chosen ones feel with particular intensity because of the additional weight they carry. The brain's ability to access its higher frequencies is the first casualty. This is why you can go days, sometimes weeks, without feeling anything that resembles the clarity you know yourself capable of. This is why the creative impulses that used to arrive with a frequency and a vividness that made you feel genuinely alive have become intermittent, harder to access, sometimes absent, for stretches long enough to make you wonder if they were ever as real as you remember. This is why prayer, which was once a place you could enter and feel the walls of the ordinary world fall away, has sometimes become a discipline you maintain more by intention than by experience, speaking words into a silence that feels thicker than it used to, waiting for a response that does not always come in the form or the timing you need. The signal has not gone. You have not lost the anointing. God has not withdrawn the frequency from your life because you have not been performing at the level your calling requires. What has happened is far more mechanical than that, and therefore far more correctable. The neural pathways through which your highest frequency moves have been progressively narrowed by the compound effect of sustained stress, disrupted sleep, and the relentless cognitive demand of a life that has not given your brain the conditions it needs to restore itself. The theta gateway that connects your conscious mind to the deeper architecture of your calling has been partially obstructed, not by divine judgment, but by neurological consequence. And neurological consequences, unlike spiritual verdicts, respond to the right intervention. What chosen ones lose first, before the creativity dims and before the clarity fades, is the quality of their inner silence. That quality of stillness that is not the absence of thought, but the presence of something beneath thought. The deep listening state that makes genuine prayer possible, that allows revelation to arrive rather than having to be manufactured, that gives the mind room to receive rather than forcing it to produce. In theta, that stillness is not something you have to construct. It is something you return to. It is the natural state of a brain that has been given permission to stop performing and start receiving. And when theta is inaccessible, the silence becomes flat rather than fertile. Prayer feels like talking to a wall, not because God has moved, but because the receiver in you has been overwhelmed by interference. The genius wave was designed precisely for this. For the chosen one who is not broken but is blocked. For the person who knows what they are capable of because they have touched it. Who knows what their mind feels like when it is operating at the frequency. God gave it because they have lived there in their best moments. And who has been trying, with everything they have, to get back to that place through sheer determination and not quite making it. 7 minutes of precisely calibrated audio, giving your brain the external frequency signal it needs to remember its own pathway home. Not forcing it, not overriding it. Simply providing the conditions under which what is already there can rise again to the surface. If you feel that pull right now, that sense that what you have been hearing in this message connects to something you have needed for longer than you realized, do not let that pull pass without acting on it. The link to the Genius Wave is in the pinned comment and in the description below this video. $39, 90 days of guarantee, and the beginning of a restoration that your mind, your calling, and the people who need what you carry have all been waiting for. Let today be the blessed day you stop waiting for the conditions to improve on their own and give your brain the one specific thing it needs to begin the return. And while we are here together in this moment, I want to say something to you that comes not from a script, but from the heart of why this channel exists. We do not make these messages because it is easy or because it is profitable. This channel is not monetized through YouTube. There are no advertisements funding what you are receiving. Every word in every video is created out of a singular conviction that chosen ones need to be found, and that the ones who find these messages deserve to receive them in full, without interruption, without the noise of commercial breaks cutting through what God is trying to say. But sustaining that work requires support. And so, if what you have heard today has genuinely touched you, if these words have met you in a place that needed meeting, we want to ask you simply and without pressure to consider supporting this channel through the donate link in the pinned comment and in the description below. Whatever you are able to give, whether it is small or whether it is more, it goes directly into keeping these messages alive and ensuring that the chosen ones who have not yet found this channel are able to find it. Your generosity is not a transaction. It is a partnership in something that matters. And if giving is not something you are able to do right now, please know that your presence here is already a contribution. Watching this video all the way through, leaving a comment that tells us you were here, sharing this message with one person in your life who you know needs to hear it, these are not small things. They are the mechanism through which this message reaches the people it was sent for. You may be the reason someone finds this tonight who has been waiting, without knowing what they were waiting for exactly this word. If you have not yet subscribed, do it now, because the conversation that is unfolding across this channel is not something you want to drop in and out of. It builds, it deepens. Each message carries something that the previous ones prepared the ground for. And the ones that are coming will go further into the territory we are only beginning to map together. Subscribe so that you are there. Like this video so that the people who need it can find their way to it, and share it with the boldness of someone who knows that what they are passing along is not entertainment but a lifeline. The chosen ones do not rise alone. They rise in the company of others who are being restored to the same frequency, who are clearing the same interference, who are returning to the same signal. You are not walking this road by yourself. The room is fuller than you think. And the further we go together, the more that will become clear. There is a moment in the life of every chosen one when the preparation ends and the commissioning begins. You may not recognize it when it arrives, because it rarely looks the way you imagined it would. You have carried a picture in your mind, perhaps for years, of what the turning point would feel like. You expected it to arrive with fanfare, with a clear and unmistakable sign that the season of waiting was over, and the season of walking in full purpose had finally begun. But the commissioning, moments that God orchestrates, rarely announce themselves with the drama that the waiting seemed to deserve. They arrive quietly, in the middle of an ordinary day, in the form of a conversation or a word or an inner knowing that something has shifted, that the ground beneath you is different than it was yesterday, even though nothing visible has changed. And the chosen ones who step into their assignment are the ones who have learned to recognize the shift even when it comes without fanfare. The preparation you have been through was not wasted. Every season that felt like delay was in fact a deepening. Every period that looked from the outside like stagnation was, from the inside of the divine plan, a time of structural reinforcement, a time when the foundations of who you are were being made capable of bearing the weight of what you are about to carry. A building that rises too quickly on inadequate foundations does not stand. And God, who is both the architect and the builder of the life He has assigned to you, does not build things that will not stand. The length of your preparation is proportional to the magnitude of your assignment. And if the preparation has felt long, if the waiting has been the kind that tests the outermost limits of your endurance, then the assignment it has been preparing you for is larger than anything you have yet been able to fully envision. This is the moment when the enemy works hardest, right at the threshold of the commissioning. Because the enemy does not need to prevent your assignment altogether. He only needs to prevent you from recognizing the moment when the door opens. If he can keep you in the posture of waiting past the moment when the waiting is over, if he can keep you rehearsing the narrative of delay, even after God has already said go, then the assignment is effectively neutralized without a single direct confrontation. The chosen one simply stands at an open door, convinced it is still closed, while the season moves forward without them. This is why the restoration of your mind is not a luxury and not a self-improvement project. It is a strategic necessity. A mind operating in the fog of blocked theta frequency cannot reliably distinguish between a door that is closed and a door that is open. It cannot consistently hear the shift when the shift comes. It cannot hold the kind of sustained, elevated perception that recognizes the commissioning moment for what it is rather than filtering it through the accumulated residue of disappointment and false starts. The clarity you need to step into your assignment is not a personality trait that some people have and others do not. It is a function of the frequency your mind is operating at. And frequency is something that can be restored. Think about Moses at the burning bush. He had been in the wilderness for 40 years. 40 years of what looked, from every external measurement, like the end of a story rather than the middle of one. He had left Egypt under circumstances that could not have felt less like divine appointment. He had settled into the rhythms of a smaller life, a quieter existence, far from the halls of power where he had once moved freely, and far from the people he had once, in his own clumsy and violent way, tried to help. By every reasonable human calculation, his moment had passed. He was too old, too forgotten, too compromised by the history he carried to be anyone's first choice for the assignment that was actually waiting for him. And then a bush burned without being consumed, and the voice that spoke from it did not begin with an apology for the delay. It did not begin with an explanation of why the 40 years had been necessary. It began with identity. In the book of Exodus, chapter 3, verse 6, God speaks and says, "I am the God of your father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob." Before the assignment is revealed, the relationship is declared. Before the commission is given, the connection is established. God does not send chosen ones into their purpose as isolated agents operating on their own authority. He sends them as ones who are known, who are held, who carry with them into every room they enter the weight and the warranty of the one who sent them. Moses argued. He listed his inadequacies with a thoroughness that suggests he had been cataloging them for some time. He pointed to his speech, to his history, to his obscurity, to the implausibility of anyone believing that this old shepherd from the backside of the desert carried a word from the God of all creation. And God, with a patience that is itself a form of instruction, answered every objection not by dismissing it but by redirecting it. "You are not adequate, Moses, but I am, and I am going with you." This is the architecture of every chosen one commission. The assignment does not rest on your adequacy. It rests on the presence of the one who calls you. Your history does not disqualify you. It has prepared you in ways that you will only fully understand in retrospect. When you can see from the other side of the assignment how specifically the wilderness shaped the deliverer that Egypt's captives needed. Your inadequacies are not obstacles to the plan. They are the very conditions under which God's sufficiency becomes unmistakable, both to you and to the people who will witness what he does through you. But here is what the Moses story also reveals, something that the surface reading can cause us to miss. Moses did not receive the commission until his mind was clear enough to recognize the anomaly. He was tending flocks, doing the ordinary work of his diminished life, when something caught his attention that did not fit the pattern of ordinary experience. A bush was burning but not being consumed, and the text says that Moses turned aside to see. He did not keep walking. He did not file the anomaly away as something to think about later, when he had more time. He turned aside. He gave the moment his full, undivided, genuinely curious attention. A mind saturated with fog does not turn aside. A mind locked in the frequency of mere survival, of getting through the day with enough left over to get through the next one, does not have the bandwidth to notice the burning bush. It sees the fire and keeps moving because there are flocks to tend and tasks to complete and the ordinary business of an ordinary life that has long since trained itself to filter out anything that does not fit the immediate agenda. The commission was always available. To Moses, the burning bush was burning. But Moses had to be in a state of sufficient mental and spiritual openness to perceive it for what it was, rather than what it appeared to be. Your burning bush may already be in your field of vision. The anomaly that does not fit the pattern of your ordinary life, the door that it is standing open while you stand in front of it, rehearsing the reasons it must still be closed, the invitation that keeps arriving in different forms, because the one who is sending it has not given up on you, even when you have come close to giving up on yourself. The question is not whether the commission is available. The question is whether your mind is operating at a frequency that allows you to recognize it. The chosen ones who step through the door are not braver than the ones who hesitate. They are not more gifted or more deserving or more spiritually advanced. They are simply operating at a frequency that allows them to see what is actually there, rather than what fear and fog and the accumulated interference of too many hard seasons has taught them to expect. Clarity is not a luxury. For the chosen one standing at the threshold of their assignment, clarity is everything. And the God who spoke from a burning bush is still speaking. The question is whether you are in a state to turn aside and hear. The stories that change you are not always the ones that arrive with the grandest language. Sometimes the story that reaches the deepest part of you is the one that sounds the most like your own. The one where you hear the details and feel, with a sudden and almost physical recognition, that the person being described has been living in the same interior country that you have been navigating alone, convinced that no map existed because no one around you seemed to know the terrain. I want to tell you about a man named Thomas. He was not in crisis. When he found his way to the frequency restoration protocol, he was functional. He had a career that worked on paper, relationships that were stable enough, a life that, measured by the metrics the world uses to evaluate such things, would have registered as fine. But Thomas had a word he used privately, a word he did not say out loud to the people around him because it did not fit the narrative of a man who had everything more or less together. The word was hollow. Not empty exactly, but hollow in the specific way that a structure can be hollow, maintaining its shape on the outside while containing nothing of substance within. He went through his days performing competence so consistently that he had almost convinced himself the performance was the same thing as the real experience. Almost. What Thomas described when he spoke about the weeks before he began the 7-minute protocol was a particular kind of mental exhaustion that he had never found the right words for until he heard the language of frequency. He said it felt like trying to tune a radio in a building with thick walls. He could hear that there was a signal. He could almost make out the shape of it, something musical and purposeful that existed just beyond the interference. But no amount of effort on his part could bring it in clearly enough to hear what it was actually saying. He had tried discipline. He had tried routine. He had tried the productivity frameworks that promise clarity through structure. None of them touched the interference. They only gave the interference a more organized container to live in. 3 weeks into using the audio daily, Thomas sent a message that contained a single sentence that has stayed with me since the day I read it. He wrote, "I remembered that I am supposed to enjoy thinking, not that he became smarter, not that his circumstances changed, not that the problems he had been carrying dissolved. He remembered that the experience of his own mind, at its natural frequency, is not a burden to be managed but a gift to be inhabited." The signal had come back, and with it, everything that had been waiting on the other side of the interference. I want to tell you about a woman named Esther, not the one from Scripture, but one whose story carries a resonance that the biblical Esther would have recognized. She was a woman who had spent years giving her best cognitive energy to everyone around her: her children, her employer, her aging parents, her community, while reserving for herself only what love was for after every other claim had been satisfied. What was left over was rarely enough to sustain the interior life she knew herself to be capable of. She had gifts, real ones, the kind that other people noticed and commented on, and then asked her to deploy in service of their needs, while she slowly lost track of what those gifts felt like when they were operating in her own direction, toward her own assignment. What the frequency restoration gave Esther was not more hours in the day. It was a quality of mental presence that made the hours she already had qualitatively different. She described it as the difference between living in a house and actually inhabiting it. The rooms were the same. The furniture had not moved. But she was suddenly, genuinely, fully there in a way that she had not been for longer than she could precisely identify. She began writing again, something she had set down so gradually that she had not noticed the moment it left her hands. Within 2 months, she had completed the first substantive creative work she had produced in 4 years. There is a verse in the book of Joel, chapter 2, verse 25, where God makes a declaration that is so specific in its targeting that it can feel almost too good to be true the first time you encounter it. God says, "I will restore to you the years that the locust has eaten," not some of the years, not a partial restoration calibrated to what seems reasonable given the circumstances. All of the years. The full measure of what was taken returned. This is not a metaphor for a partial recovery. This is the language of complete restoration, spoken by the one who has both the authority and the resources to make it literal. The locusts in your story have had names: stress, chronic pressure, disrupted sleep, sustained uncertainty. Seasons of carrying more than one person was designed to carry without the support that the weight required. And the years they consumed are real losses that deserve to be acknowledged rather than minimized. You did not simply have a difficult few months. You have lived through seasons of genuine deprivation, of the condition your mind and your calling required to flourish. And the God who sees the full account of what was taken is not asking you to be grateful for the loss or to pretend it was less than it was. He is saying that the account will be settled, that the restoration will be proportional not to what seems possible, but to what was actually owed. What this means practically, in the territory of your mind and your frequency and your creative and cognitive capacity, is that the restoration you are moving toward is not a return to where you were before the locusts arrived. It is a return to where you were always supposed to be, the frequency you were designed for before the interference began, before the accumulated pressure of living in a world running at the wrong signal started narrowing the pathways through which your highest capacity moves. You are not trying to get back to a previous version of yourself. You are moving toward the original version, the one that existed in the mind of God before any of the interference had a chance to intervene. The people in these stories are not extraordinary in the way the world uses that word. They did not have advantages that you do not have. They were not further along or more qualified or more spiritually prepared. They were simply willing to give their brain the specific thing it needed for 7 minutes a day, consistently enough for the restoration to take hold. And what the restoration gave them was not a new personality or a new set of circumstances. It gave them back the mind they already had, operating at the frequency it was always supposed to operate at, which turned out to be more than enough for everything their assignment required. The testimonies keep arriving. A retired engineer who had written off his creative years as behind him, who began solving problems in his sleep and waking with solutions he had not been able to find consciously for months. A young mother who had lost the thread of her own identity in the beautiful and exhausting work of raising children, who found that 7 minutes before anyone else in the house woke up, returned her to herself in a way that nothing else had managed to do. A pastor who had been preaching from his notes for 2 years because the spontaneous flow that once characterized his teaching had gone quiet, who found after 3 weeks that the words were coming again from a place deeper than preparation. These are not coincidences arranged by marketing. They are the predictable result of a brain returning to the frequency it was designed for. When the signal is restored, the things that the signal was always meant to carry begin to move again. It is not magic. It is not mystery in the sense of something that cannot be understood. It is the entirely comprehensible, scientifically documented, spiritually consistent result of a chosen one operating at the frequency of their actual design. Now I want to ask you to do something simple. If what you have heard in these testimonies has stirred something in you, If you recognized yourself in Thomas, or in Esther, or in any of the others, go to the comments right now and type the words "Restore me." Not as a religious performance, not as a ritual gesture, but as a genuine declaration to yourself and to heaven that you are ready, that you are no longer willing to operate below the frequency of who you actually are, that the years the locusts have eaten are about to be returned, and you are positioning yourself to receive every last one of them. There is something that happens in the life of a chosen one when the restoration begins that no one adequately warned them about. They expected the breakthrough to feel like arrival. They expected the clearing of the fog to feel like stepping out of a dark room into sunlight, a clean and obvious transition from one state to another, unmistakable in its quality and immediate in its completeness. What they did not expect was that restoration would feel, in its early stages, less like arrival and more like remembering, less like becoming someone new and more like recognizing someone who was always there, who had been present through every hard season and every disorienting chapter, waiting with a patience that outlasted everything the darkness threw at them. This is the nature of what God restores. He does not replace the original with something different. He recovers what was always there. He clears the interference without changing the signal. He removes the obstruction without altering what was flowing beneath it. And when the chosen one first touches that restored frequency, the experience is not the triumphant arrival of a stranger, but the profound and sometimes overwhelming recognition of a self that never actually left, that could not be destroyed by what tried to destroy it, that survived every season of suppression with its essential nature intact and its assignment still alive and still waiting to be walked out. You have survived things that were designed to end you, not in the dramatic sense of immediate physical danger, though some of you have been in those places too, but in the more insidious sense of things designed to erode you so gradually that you would not notice the erosion, until the shape of who you were had been worn down to something unrecognizable. The chronic pressure that has no single source and no clean resolution. The relational wounds that did not announce themselves as wounds until the numbness they produced had already spread further than you realized. The seasons of spiritual dryness that made you question not just the presence of God, but the validity of everything you thought you knew about who you were and what you were here for. These things were not random hardships distributed by an indifferent universe. They were targeted, and the target was always the same thing: the frequency, the signal, the specific capacity that God placed in you that, if it were ever allowed to operate at its full power, would make you genuinely dangerous to every structure of darkness that has been operating in your sphere of influence. But here is what the targeting could not accomplish, for all its sophistication and all its persistence. It could not touch the original. It could disrupt the signal, but it could not erase it. It could narrow the pathways, but it could not seal them permanently. It could create interference, but it could not alter the frequency itself, because the frequency was not placed in you by any earthly source, and therefore cannot be removed by any earthly force. What God inscribes in a chosen one before they take their first breath is written in a language that the darkness cannot read clearly enough to edit. It can obscure, it can suppress, it can bury under years of accumulated weight, but it cannot delete. And what cannot be deleted can always be recovered. This is the promise that runs beneath the surface of every restoration narrative in Scripture. The thread that connects Joseph in the pit to Joseph on the throne. The thread that connects David in the wilderness, fleeing from a king who had turned against him and playing his songs to sheep on a hillside. to David receiving the covenant that would make his lineage the line through which the redemption of the world would come. The thread that connects the disciples hiding behind locked doors in the aftermath of the crucifixion to the same disciples standing in the public square 50 days later, speaking with a clarity and a power that turned the known world upside down. In every case, the original was recovered. In every case, what looked like the end of the story from the inside of it turned out to be the preparation for the chapter that made everything before it make sense. Your story is not finished. That sounds like something people say to be kind, a piece of spiritual encouragement offered to fill the silence when there is nothing more concrete to give. But I am not saying it to fill the silence. I am saying it because it is structurally true in a way that the nature of your assignment makes inescapable. The chosen ones are not sent with assignments that can be completed in the opening chapters of their lives. They are sent with purposes that require the quiet fullness of who they are, including and especially the fullness that only comes through the refinement of suffering, the deepening that only comes through the valley, the authority that only comes through having navigated the territory your assignment will require you to lead up others through. You cannot lead people through what you have not yourself traversed, and the traversal, as painful and as long as it has been making you into the specific kind of guide that your assignment requires. Not a guide who has read about the valley from a comfortable distance and can describe it in the abstract. A guide who knows where the water is, who recognizes the sounds of the night in that place, who can look another person standing at the entrance to that dark passage and say with the dark authority of someone who has walked it, I know this road. I know what it asks of you, and I know what is on the other side. The book of Romans, chapter 8, verse 28, carries a statement that is so familiar in its phrasing that it is possible to let it pass through the mind without allowing it to land with the full weight of what it is actually claiming. Paul writes that all things work together for good for those who love God, who are called according to his purpose. All things. Not the pleasant things, not the things that feel like they are moving in the right direction, not the chapters that seem to have an obvious redemptive arc. All things. The confusion and the delay, and the loss and the seasons that made no sense from the inside of them. All of it is being worked together, not sequentially but simultaneously, into a coherence that the vantage point of the middle of the story does not allow you to see, but that the author of the story has never lost sight of. Called according to his purpose. That phrase is not describing a category of especially devout or especially gifted individuals. It is describing the structural reality of your existence. You were not placed here randomly and then assessed to see whether you might be useful for a purpose. You were called before you arrived. The purpose preceded the person, which means that every chapter of your life, including the chapters that seem to contradict the purpose, has been operating inside a narrative arc that was authored before any of it began. The contradiction is not evidence that the purpose has been abandoned. It is evidence that the story is more complex, more layered, and ultimately more powerful than a simpler version of it would have been. What the restoration of your frequency allows you to do is perceive the arc, not just feel it in moments of faith and then lose it in moments of pressure, but actually operate from it, consistently, in the way that a navigator operates from a map that they trust because they have learned from experience, that the map is accurate even when the terrain feels disorienting. The theta state is where the arc becomes perceptible. It is where the pieces that seem disconnected in ordinary waking consciousness begin to show their connections, where the pattern emerges from what looked like randomness, where the call of God that you have been trying to hear through layers of interference becomes clear enough to follow with the kind of confidence that does not require all the answers before taking the next step. This is what the chosen ones who have walked before you discovered in their own seasons of restoration. Not that everything suddenly made sense in the way a solved puzzle makes sense, all pieces flat and accounted for and the image complete, but that they could move again, that the paralysis of the fog lifted enough for forward motion to become possible again, and that forward motion, even tentative and imperfect forward motion, is what allows the rest of the story to unfold. You cannot see the next chapter from where you are standing, but you can take the next step, and the next step is always enough for the one who called you to work with. The arc is holding. The purpose is intact. The signal that was placed in you before you drew your first breath is not diminished by what has tried to silence it. It is waiting with a patience that mirrors the patience of the one who placed it there for the conditions that allow it to rise. And those conditions are closer than the fog has let you believe. You have made it to this moment. Not because the algorithm was kind to you, and not because you happened to be in the right place at the right time. You are here because something in you refused to stop reaching, even in the seasons when reaching felt like the most exhausting thing a person could do. You are here because the signal that got placed in you before you took your first breath has been pressing against every layer of interference and every season of fog and every voice that told you the door was closed, and it brought you through whatever winding path your life has taken to this exact moment, this exact word, this exact threshold. And standing at this threshold, I want to do something that feels right for where we have arrived together. Not over you, as though the prayer is something being administered from a distance, but with you, as one chosen one standing alongside another in the presence of the God who knew both of our names before either of us arrived in this world. So if you are willing, wherever you are right now, whether you are sitting in a quiet room or driving home or lying in the dark, trying to find enough stillness to hear Neil sing real, I invite you to simply be present for this. You do not have to close your eyes if that feels strange. You do not have to perform anything. Just let these words reach the place in you that has been waiting to be reached. Father, you see this one. You see exactly where they are right now, what they are carrying, what has been pressing against their chest in the middle of the night, when the rest of the world is quiet, and there is nothing left between them and the truth of what they feel. You see the years that were harder than they should have been. You see the gifts that went unexpressed in seasons when the fog was too thick for them to find their way to the surface. You see the calling that has never left, even when the one who carries it had moments of wondering whether you had changed your mind about them. And you know, as only you can know, what this moment is for them. So meet them here, not in a way that requires them to perform anything or achieve anything or prove anything. Just meet them, the way you met Moses at a burning bush, the way you met David in a field, the way you met every chosen one who came before this one, exactly where they were, with exactly what they needed. Restore the frequency you placed in them. Clear the pathways that the pressure of living has narrowed. Let the signal rise. Let what you placed in them before the beginning find its way to the surface now. And let them feel, in whatever way you choose to make it known, that you have not changed your mind, that the calling is still active, that the assignment is still waiting, that they are still yours. Amen. Something shifted just now. You may feel it clearly, or you may feel only the quietest edge of it, like the first movement of air before a wind arrives. But the prayer that was just spoken over your life was not empty words. It was a point of contact between where you are and where you are going, and the God who heard it is already moving in the direction of your restoration. Now let me speak to you about what comes next, because the mistake that chosen ones make most often at moments like this one is treating the threshold as the destination. The threshold is not the destination. It is the beginning of the walk, and the walk requires that you give yourself the conditions that allow your frequency to remain clear, that you protect the restoration that has been initiated, that you stop returning to the habits of fog and interference, as though the old state were somehow safer than the one you are being called into. The genius wave is one of the most practical tools available to you for maintaining that restoration in the demands of ordinary daily life. 7 minutes every day, giving your brain the specific frequency signal it needs to stay clear, to stay elevated, to maintain access to the theta gateway and the gamma capacity that your calling requires. It is not a substitute for prayer or for the spiritual disciplines that have sustained chosen ones through every generation. It is the neurological complement to those practices, the thing that ensures the physical instrument through which your spiritual life is expressed is operating at the frequency that allows that expression to be as clear and as powerful as it was designed to be. The link to the Genius Wave is in the pinned comment beneath this video and in the description below. $39, protected by a 90-day money-back guarantee, through the one legitimate link that carries Dr. Rivers' fully calibrated protocol. Do not let this moment be one that you look back on as the day you heard something true and chose to wait for a more convenient time to act on it. The more convenient time is a fiction that the fog produces to keep chosen ones standing at open doors. The link is there. The window is still open, and the version of you that operates at full frequency is closer than you have been willing to believe. This channel is no longer monetized. We made that choice deliberately because we believe that what is spoken here should arrive without the noise of commercial interest standing between the word and the person it was sent for. But we also chose to keep going, to keep making these videos, to keep showing up for the chosen ones who need these messages at the right moment, in the right season of their lives, because we believe that is exactly what this work is for. If you want to walk alongside us in keeping this journey alive, you can support this channel through a voluntary donation, through the link placed in the description or in the pinned comment below this video. We are grateful for every contribution, however small it may feel to the one who gives it. We are grateful for every prayer offered on behalf of this work. We are grateful for every share that carries this message to someone who has been waiting for it without knowing what they were waiting for. Every act of support, whether it is financial or a simple comment or a quiet prayer whispered on behalf of this channel, is received with more gratitude than we can adequately express. You are not just supporting a channel. You are partnering with a mission that believes every chosen one deserves to be found. And if giving is not something you are able to do right now, please hear this clearly. Your presence here is already a gift. The fact that you stayed, that you gave this message the full attention it asked of you, that you let these words reach past the surface into the places that needed reaching, that is not a small thing. Leave a comment below before you go. Tell us where you are in your journey. Tell us what resonated. Tell us what shifted. Because every comment is a signal that reaches other chosen ones who are scrolling past this video, wondering whether anyone else feels what they feel. And your words in the comment section may be the thing that makes someone else stop and stay. If you have not yet subscribed to this channel, do it now. because this conversation does not end here. The messages that are coming will go deeper into the territory we have only begun to map together, and the chosen ones who stay connected will be the ones who receive what those messages were sent to give. Subscribe so that you are there when the next word arrives. Like this video so that the people who need it can find their way to it. Share it with one person tonight, just one, the one whose face came to mind somewhere in the middle of this message, the one you sensed needed to hear what you have been hearing. Trust that instinct. It did not arrive by accident. You are not the same person who pressed play at the beginning of this message. Something has moved. Something has shifted in the direction of what you were always meant to become. The frequency is returning. The signal is rising. The fog is beginning to lift from the edges inward, and what is being revealed beneath it is not a stranger. It is you, the original you, the one God designed before the interference began, the one whose assignment has been waiting, with a patience that mirrors the patience of heaven itself. The chosen ones do not rise because everything finally becomes easy. They rise because they decide, at a specific and often quiet moment, that the frequency God placed in them is worth protecting, worth restoring, and worth walking in regardless of what the fog has told them about who they are and what is possible for. You have made that decision tonight, and heaven has taken note. Go forward. The assignment is waiting, and you are finally fully ready to carry it. And now, before we close, let these words settle over you like a final breath before the next chapter begins. You were not an accident. You were not an afterthought. You were not placed here to live at the frequency of the ordinary when God designed you for the extraordinary. Every hard season was held. Every tear was counted. Every moment of waiting was purposeful in the hands of the one who does not waste anything. The signal is yours. The frequency is yours. The assignment has your name on it, and it has had your name on it since before you arrived. Go and walk in it. Go and live at the level you were built for. Go and be without apology and without hesitation exactly what God made you to be. We will be here when the next word is ready, and it is coming sooner than you think.